Good morning, good morning. On this, the 4th of August. Wow, the 4th already. At 10 a.m. It's good to have you here with me this morning. Thanks for sharing this hour with me. And I hope you're all well and doing fine. This gorgeous weather we've got, apart from the humidity and the extreme heat, it's gorgeous if you stay inside and your air conditioning is good. But I do hope you're all well. So, what's happening today? Well, first, as always, I'm going to mention the number of those who've died from COVID-19, which the last report I could find was a total of 154,471. Again, an absolutely astonishing number and a scary number. It's mind-boggling. It really is absolutely mind-boggling, and it's just we have to remember that behind every one of those digits is a person with a life, with a family, and it's just really, really sad. So, how do we kind of make this real? Well, I try and find stories to make it real. So, good morning, Vern, and good morning, Karen, and good morning, Laurie. It's good to see you all. For some reason, my number thing isn't working. So I don't see the number of people who are on. Although there's 8 on apparently. Go figure. So let's humanize this and let's talk about a couple called Lester and Lillian Schindler. They were married for 70 years and there was a couple in their 90s. And Lillian had unfortunately succumbed to Alzheimer's or something like that. And then Lester broke his leg and he ended up being sent to a different place. So they've been together for 70 years. And right at the end of their lives, as Lillian contracted COVID-19, and in this rehab place, Lester contracted COVID-19. They died within hours of each other. Apparently, according to the Sun, Lester was always saying, "Come on, Lillian, let's go to the movies, let's go to the restaurant." And the Sun was saying it's like Lester died and went before Lillian and went to Lillian and said, "Come on, Lillian, let's get going." It's a kind of really beautiful, romantic, full of love and full of hope story. And yet the thing is that he shouldn't have caught COVID-19 in a rehab place, all things being equal. She shouldn't have either. So it's one of those tragic stories. It also reminds me of a song by one of, this is going to shock you. She's a country singer. Kathy, I think I would pronounce it Mattea, Mattea, Mattea. She has an absolutely gorgeous voice, and she's a storyteller. And her albums, I think I've got most of them. But don't tell anyone because that will ruin my rock credibility. But there's a track called "Where Have You Been?" And I think it's on one of the albums. It's a kind of hidden track that if you don't let the CD run on, talking about CDs, gosh, I'm showing my age again, you'd never find it. But it's an absolutely beautiful song that reduces you to tears. And she sings it so beautifully as well. So that's Kathy and Mattea, Mattea. Where Have You Been? You may find a version of it on YouTube. But it's heartrending stories like this of things that in our normal lives would never have happened, which just sort of elevates the tragedy of where we are in the country with 154 souls, 154,471, 73 of those having died in Florida alone. So please do remember all those people and their families and friends in your prayers. And we welcome Pam and Father Lewis and Mike and Jennifer. It's good to see you all. So let's do a bit of housekeeping. Next Tuesday and Thursday. So next Tuesday, Thursday, which is the 11th and 13th of August, if my math is correct. Maybe. There will be no videos. I kind of need a break. I'm writing 1 billion words a week. I'm speaking more than 2 billion. And if Father Lewis says something now, I will wait. Good morning, Holly. It's tiring for me, and never mind anybody else. So I just want to take a week off so I can catch up with a few things, and just have a bit of a break from listening to the sound of my own voice, basically. So that's next Tuesday, the 11th, and next Thursday, the 13th. That there will be no videos for that week. So please remember that. I'll try and put something on Facebook, but please let other people know if you can. And I want to talk about the drive-through communions. Good morning, Paula. We've just done our 3rd week of that, and the first week was full of promise. Within the hour of 11 and 12, I think we did 34. The week afterwards, which was absolutely bonkers hot, we had fewer. I think it was like 21. This week, this last Sunday, we had 14 people, which I'd love to know why. We are a church that comes around the altar as a family, and communion, Holy Communion, is the center of that. And only 14 people within an hour turned up. So if you're one of those people who's never come to receive communion, I would suggest you make the effort. And I do hope that the numbers pick up next week. It's not that I'm bothered, because Father Lewis and myself standing out there waiting for the full hour under the blazing heat of the sun. You can hear the crickets going. You can feel the desert, and you see the bones of those. What is the bones of you always see in those westerns? Yes, Jean, it is disappointing, and I would hope it is our one and only opportunity in this new normal that we have, that more people aren't taking advantage of it. So please do. I would expect that you'd need a really good reason not to turn up. This is who we are as a community, so please do take advantage of it. So what's next? Well, as always, I get a lot of emails and texts and stuff referring to either what I've talked about or suggestions as to what I may talk about, and some of them are trying to kind of, in a way, push me in a certain direction, which is it's all right. It's interesting enough to do, and some of them are kind of responses, very interesting responses. So I'm going to talk about something kind of secular in one way, but then I think it feeds naturally into answering one of the questions. Good morning, Diane. Answering one of the questions about the Beatitudes that was asked last week, but Father Lewis and myself couldn't really answer it because it seemed a bit vaguer than me, which is saying something. So I'm going to kind of work through it. You may wonder where the heck I'm going with this. So the first thing I want to talk about is what's been spoken of recently, within the last couple of months. Time's flying, and it's hard to sort of gauge things now. But the idea of defunding the police. What are my thoughts on defunding the police? That was the question. Well, let me kind of tie in a bit of history. When I first heard this, I'm thinking, what? Defunding the police? The police are the only people that sort of protect us from absolute anarchy. And you can see that when what happened was it San Francisco, when a portion of the city was occupied. It had a name, chat, something like that. Somebody will correct me on it. And it meant something. It's an acronym. And it reminded me of the kind of peace-loving hippie hangout things. Hey, Kit and Bill. Um, and in the 60s, not that I remember because, oh, I'm wearing the shirt, so I can't lie anymore. This shirt is 8 years old, by the way. When Carol Shellman gets you a birthday present, it lasts a long time. It has been washed, I must say, but it's lasting really well. Seattle, chop or chaz? Thanks, Dan. Well, whatever it means, I don't really care. Uh, but the idea being, it seemed to me to be like kind of one of these peacenik hangouts um, that tried to promote a different way of living in peace and harmony and this, that, and the other. We as Christians should know that human nature being what it is, if you are the best person in the world in terms of being peaceful and happy and go lucky and things like that, it's not going to last long because something is going to happen that will irk you and the peace will dissipate. And I can give you a practical example of that. The English Franciscans, the Anglican Franciscans, I should say, they changed their prayer book and they removed from their new prayer book, their daily office book, all what's known as cursing psalms, the psalms which talk about what you hope God would do to X, Y, Z, so that the vengeance of the Lord may be paid upon them. And there's quite a few of them. And there's also parts of scripture as well. Well, this didn't fit in with the kind of, hey, we love all creatures and people and animals vision of the Anglican Franciscans in England. So they had them removed. I know this because we were invited, we being St. Stephen's House, my seminary in England, were invited to kind of trial run the new version of the prayer book. And we all thought the same thing. Boy, is it clunky. You needed 15 fingers in one hand just to find all the bits and pieces because it was thrown all over the place. And we gave our feedback and they ignored it and they put it into production and in use for the friaries. Within a few months, they were almost killing each other. And they discovered that the cursing psalms have a practical purpose. It allowed people, these peace-loving friars, it allowed them to express all the frustrations they felt within community life, but didn't feel able to, because of the love of God, to go and smack somebody in the face. And remember, these would be really low-level things. You know, somebody's chewing their food too loud or something, I don't know. But it's not going to be a big thing. So if a purposely connected community of people who love the same God and follow the same Savior and have pledged to love one another can't do it, and they need these. By the way, they changed the book, but they went back to their old daily office book and reinstituted the cursing psalms so they could vent their whatever, their frustration. But if those people couldn't do it, how would we expect non-religious people to be able to manage it? And so the truth was, within a very short time, things happened. Oh, and Diane says on YouTube, I can vouch for that in my own experience too. Without those psalms in their entirety, the sisters would have killed each other. Yes, I know. Yeah, it was bad enough. I mean, I was in seminary for 2 years, and sometimes it was like, I need to get out of here. Unfortunately, I could do. But I couldn't go to the Bodleian and set it on fire because that was not allowed. Anyway, that's another story. So it didn't take long till there was murder and mayhem, and people trash the place because what they don't own, they don't care for. And, you know, so that's part of my first impression. It was, no, we really need the police. Then I actually heard what defunding actually means. And it made me think that out of all the institutions, one that's kind of changed the most but in perhaps what I would consider the wrong way is the police service. Notice I use the word service. Um, and that's because of how it changed in England. It used to be called the police force, and then it changed to police service. But the weird thing is that the police became more forceful after they became known as service than being a service to people. It's kind of weird. But we have on the squad cars, to protect and serve. And sometimes you have to think, who the hell are they protecting and serving? Because of what goes on. So the whole thing has shifted. What does it mean to have a police service or a police force? What are they supposed to do? What is their role? And I'm going to try and unpick this. There is a BBC documentary, What is Killing American Men, I think it's called. It's something like that. The Bring Your Own Bible and Beverage group watched it together. And it's about the rise of kind of older white male suicide in the US. Now, across all the spectrum of all races and colours and creeds, there is a huge amount of male suicide. But in the US over the past few years, the uptick of white male, and it's older white male, it's not younger, it's older white male, sort of in mid-40s and above, has gone through the roof. And kind of the epicenter of this, it seems to be Montana, according to the BBC documentary. So this documentary writer and producer went over to see, if she could find out what the story was. And it was really kind of frightening. The kind of despair that was being talked about by otherwise, very healthy and very vibrant people. But everything seems to be stacked against them. That's how they felt. And obviously there can be perception versus reality. But if you feel that way and you feel the only way's out, and we had this harrowing story of this chappie who just felt such despair, well, I don't know why, that he got his shotgun out and he loaded it. And then he looked at his dog and he was thinking, well, if I got to go, then the dog has to go too. So he put another cartridge in. And then he says, I can't do it. I can't kill the dog. And so in a way, the dog saved his life. But even as he spoke about this event, you could feel the pain coming through. Now, why am I telling you all this when it's to do with defunding the police? Well, because one of the major jobs in Montana for the police is to go around checking on people who, men who may be suicidal. And they, all of them said, this isn't a job we were trained to do. They are not trained mental health professionals. And of course, a lot of the funding, and then we went to one of the local hospitals, and the guy who ran the ER talked about how that specialty of mental health had been reduced. And of course, in the 70s, was it, the kind of mental health hospitals per se became part of the care in the community thing. I believe the same thing happened here as happened in the UK with a similar outcome as well. And so the police are saying this is not our job, but there's no money to have the people whose job it is, who are the professionals who can talk to and care for and provide ways of other different groups. So can they go to the hospital and find the medication they need, all these other things that a trained professional could do, but it's not in the budget. And so that's just one of a gazillion things. There are concerns though. So my idea being that defund is the absolute wrong word. It's more like change the emphasis. Now, when we think of the police, we think of the news and the number of murders and this and the other and what goes on, and we think, wow, the job they have. But when somebody did a study, a lot of people did a study on what police actually do over a basic day, or a basic week, or a basic month, and a tiny, tiny proportion of that is violent crime, because believe it or not, statistics have shown that violent crime is down way from years ago. It's a much safer place to be than it used to be. And Father Victor and I can vouch for that. When we ended up getting lost in New York and ended up in a Hasidic part of the town, and we were, we weren't fazed at all. Maybe because we're stupid, I don't know. But we went into a cafe, and these people were really nice, and we had coffee and stuff, and they told us which way to go. And not one part of the New York that we were in at the time, and I mean, I know there are other parts of it, that did we feel in danger. And I think that would have been a different matter a number of years ago. I don't mean going into the Hasidic part of town. Just wandering around would have been something you'd have been told off not to do. So things have changed, yet we still have this perception of doom and gloom and death. And that when you consider that a minor part of a police officer's life is dealing with violent crime, then you wonder what the other part of the work they do. And there's also the attitude that tends to come across, which is noted in a lot of videos, that some of the police, they're just not interested in treating you as a human being, but they're suspicious from the get-go. And we can feed into this. So say you stopped for, and you just stopped. Police comes behind you, you're in a car and you stop. And they say, "Excuse me, sir, do you know what speed you were traveling?" What do you say? If you're a normal, nice person, say it was 30-mile-an-hour limit, and you said, "Well, I was doing 32. You just admitted to breaking the law." But the thing is, there's so many laws in the statute books that you've broken quite a few somewhere. But the point is that there's an assumed guilt, which, and quite a lot of the time, your rights, as in the Constitution, are just thrown to the wall, because there's a kind of belligerence in some. Now, this is anecdotal. I mean, I had my own experiences in the UK, but I also talked to a lot of people in the US, and this is from them, that there is a kind of natural belligerence that, you've done something wrong, they are right, and it doesn't matter what they say, because they're just going to ride roughshod over you. And that is wrong. That's a manner of training more than anything else. So there's those things. I'd like to see the police retrained. I'd like their training to be a heck of a lot longer than, was it like half a year, I believe. From what I've heard, it takes longer to become a manicurist and pedicurist than it does to become a fully fledged police officer. Now, there's something wrong with that. I also think there should be some more vetting done, because sometimes you get these pseudo-military types who suddenly find themselves in a uniform, and that's the last thing they should be in. And again, I've seen this in other areas of life. I came to the church through the Church Lads and Church Girls Brigade, and it's a voluntary organization where you wear a uniform. But some of the people who became officers to be a part of the brigade, who would run companies and stuff, they thought of themselves as being in some kind of paramilitary thing, and they would sort of, they'd be really kind of uppity and authoritarian. I've seen it in the Boy Scouts. I used to go to some of the meetings when I was running the Cub Scouts, and the people would be there in their uniforms, and they'd have the kind of military buzz cut thing going on, and you'd talk to them, and it sounded like they treated their Cub Scouts as some sort of wing of the military. And it's kind of, I've met people like that, and it's not nice. And if you have people with real authority, it can turn tragic very, very quickly. So there's that part of things. Now, I'm painting with a broad brush. There are some beautiful stories about honourable police officers and sheriffs who've done absolutely wonderful things. We hear it time and time and time again. But there is a kind. It's the, what do they call it? It's institutionalized. This it seems to be that the safer we become, the more remote the law enforcement becomes, and the more militaristic it becomes. Watching some of the scenes of late, it just reminded me of dictatorships, where the police are wearing, well, are they the police? We didn't know. Do people have rights? Apparently not. Was everybody there rioting? No. As I've mentioned before, with every protest, peaceful protest, there are a group comes in who are there to make sure trouble is caused, because that's their political viewpoint. So where am I going with all this? I'm not sure, really. I'd like to see a calmer, more approachable assumption of innocence approach from the police. I'd like to stop seeing police in political adverts. I saw this for the first time a few years ago, and it was somebody, a Democrat, was being promoted in Newport Richie, and I was just appalled. Say, for instance, so we have this, what was he? Sheriff? I can't remember what he was now. He's a Democrat, and he pulls somebody up, or his force pulls somebody up who has a bunch of Republican stickers on the back. How do you know they're not being pulled up because of what's on the back of your car? And it's the same the other way around. How can you be sure? I mean, politics should not be in it. They should not be allowed to be in adverts promoting a particular political viewpoint. It should be a part of their job description to be absolutely out of that situation. So that's one thing that really annoys me. The other thing that annoys me as well is this ability for the police to appear on TV and be the judge and jury. In the UK, it's kind of interesting, because when the cops come on TV about any case, they will say something like, a person was apprehended at such and such a time, and he was arrested on suspicion of X, Y, Z. And it's done in this real formulaic way. So you're really not much the wiser. A crime's been committed, and it's about something, but you really don't know. And then the news pick up on it, the reporters pick up on it, and then they are the ones that slam across the front pages of the papers, of what the story's about and why this person's as guilty as anything. But it's not the police's job. Whereas here, you get people saying, well, they've done this, this, and this, and they are already distorting any kind of justice in what they're saying. And there's a particular sheriff who does this all the time. He just loves the camera. Right, so let's see what's been written. These rioters were doing serious physical damage to those men who are trying to restore law and order. Police have been killed and blinded by the rioters. Has to be said, it works both ways there, Diane. Peaceful protesters have been injured as well. What are they to do? Like I say, we live in a world where there is a portion of society, if it's not society, portion of political discontents. They have a weird political viewpoint, and part of what they do is to undermine it. Well, the rioters aren't peaceful, but for for the most part, those who really, is that right? Sheriff is a political position. Oh, that's terrible. Wow, that's bad. Yeah, but there are places where they are peaceful. You've got to pick out. You can't just paint everything with a broad brush, and then and using they isn't helpful either. Um, for the most part, they start off peaceful, and then this group comes in and causes the hassle, and everybody gets thrown in jail and arrested, or shot at, or tear gassed, or other versions which are the same as tear gas, but we don't like to talk about it because we'd sooner smudge things and not say what actually happens. And it's scary. It really is scary because, you know, if we're supposed to be a law and order thing, then we're supposed to be a law and order state, country. And that means that those who are involved in protecting us have to follow the law too. And the government has to follow the law too. Just saying. And that's where I'm ending with this, because it, to me, it kind of moves into one of the questions that was asked by, well, I can't remember who it was. I'm not going to say who it was by, but it was about last week's Thursday afternoon on the Sermon on the Mount and the week before's. We spent a long time last week trying to answer questions on the Sermon on the Mount, so that actually soaked up half the time that we would have had. And so what I thought I would do, I asked Father Lewis about this, and he was okay with it, is try and sort of give a fuller answer to some of the questions I've been asked. And as someone said that we didn't really answer one of the questions in the way that they understood or thought it was a full enough answer, that's where I'm going to go. So this is the question. All right. In the first Beatitudes, flourishing are the poor in spirit because theirs the kingdom of heaven, and flourishing are those who mourn because they shall be comforted. You explained in detail both parts of each statement, that is, what it is to be poor, what the kingdom of heaven means. But when it came to the third Beatitude, flourishing are the meek because they shall inherit the earth. As far as I can remember, you explained what it is to be meek or humble, but you didn't go into what Jesus meant by saying they shall inherit the earth. Right, so, and I like the end of this. Being one of the most meek and humble people, naturally, I would like to know when I am likely to inherit the earth. And with that important thought in mind, I mean, I just have to answer it. So, let's listen to those three again. Flourishing are the poor in spirits because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Flourishing are the mourners because they will be comforted. Flourishing are the humble because they will inherit the world. If you remember, the background we gave to all of this was of a way of being, of becoming, which is done through the wisdom literature of the Bible, this strong thread of what would otherwise be called a philosophical outlook, which in some ways parallels the Greco-Roman ideas of virtue, but not virtue as an end in itself. Within the Hebraic framework, God is the source, and we're working towards finding fulfillment, flourishing within the creative order and with God as the final goal. Although it sounds a bit Buddhist at that point and Hinduistic, but you know what I mean. As God is the source of all things, then we want to get back to the source and to perfection, I suppose, in a way. So the first part of the flourishing is to recognize in yourself just what you don't have, that you are the sum total of a bunch of things for which you are not the cause, your place of birth, when you were born, all the experience you had in your childhood, which bring you to who you are as a person, and that you have to kind of empty yourself in a way, and understand your total reliance upon God. And when that happens, you will understand that all of a sudden the kingdom of God is available to you, that all that God has on offer is there for you. It's a very kind of narrow way of and shallow way of putting it, but I'm hoping you kind of remember it from a couple of weeks ago. And then same thing as mourning. Mourning's not about remembering people who've died and that kind of sadness. It's to do with, again, this thinking we have something to offer. That we have our own gifts that are ours, that we own, and we're doing people a favor if we share them. We may not think that, but that's how we kind of work in this society. We talk about the self-made millionaire. There's nobody self-made. We talk about latent geniuses and stuff. Again, if there wasn't all that knowledge beforehand from them to build on, then they wouldn't be a genius. So there's nothing that we have which isn't gifted to us from somewhere else. And of course, the source of all gifts is God himself. And when we recognize this, the kind of natural outcome of all this is kind of despair. It's that existential moment that when you live day in, minute by minute and hour by hour, and observe yourself, there's a kind of, well, what's the point of it all? And the idea here being the point of it all is that God has gifted you. God loves you. God has given you his grace. And that is the comfort. Not that we have to own anything, that I have to say, hey, I'm doing you a great big favor by doing this, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Because you're not. What you're doing is I am sharing with you what God has given me. And that extends the comfort because people are getting something out of it. The flourishing are the humble or the meek, because they will inherit the world. There is something in this world which is just crying out, and we hear it loud and clear, and it's justice. So there's the connection, maybe a bit loose. And we have this innate thing that says to us, this is not right. And then God says, well, what are you going to do about it? So what are we going to do about it? Well, remember, this quite often when we think about justice, we think of it nowadays in a secular way, that this law, this rule, it's been transgressed and it ends up with this result. You get arrested, you get a fine, you get points on your license, whatever it is. And and you cop up to it. Well, justice for the Israelites and for us as Christians is a God thing. It's a God-given mandate that when we transgress God's law, well, the wages of sin is death. It destroys everything about us. But not only that, while we're living in the world and having our being, we can be destroyed, oppressed, etc., by people who are unjust, who not only break God's laws, but they transgress everything. And sometimes the society allows that to happen in ways that God would be horrified, because we've secularized things so much and we've created our own new normals that, what was it Margaret Thatcher says? Greed is good. Oh, no, there's no such thing as society, she said. And then the yuppies came to the fore, the young, upwardly mobile people who were getting tons and tons of money from the stock exchange and doing all that kind of stuff. And they became the poster boys, normally boys, for this ruinous excess in the world. and everything's been turned upside down. All kind of moral ideas are just kind of backwards now. I heard of this term incel. That's what's it now for something something celibate. This group of men who feel that they should be having sex because that's the norm of society, and because they can't, they've set up a group which is more like a women's, hate women's group. It's just weird. And we have all these really weird things. We have all these conspiracies that are going on. That people think there's the Illuminati and all these other things. It's all these distortions of what is true that people then live by. A really good one is a few years ago when one of the politicians in the US said, involuntary celibate, thank you, Paula, as if, it's a terrible crime to be that. And so they can become abusive to women. Strange but true. Yeah, there was a politician a few years ago who quoted Jesus by saying, the poor you will always have with you, claiming that we didn't need to do anything for the poor because it's in the Bible that we have them, as if that was a correct and clear exegesis, which it isn't. It's an absolute distortion. But we do it all the time. So what is the Bible saying here? Well, let me give you a few examples from the Psalms, from Proverbs, where's the other bit, and Psalms, just to see what the Bible is saying. So this is Psalm 41, verses 1 and 2. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. The Lord protects him and keeps him alive. He is called blessed in the land. You do not give him up to the will of his enemies. So there's something about people who see the poor as a subject worthy of doing something about, and that God will bless them. Proverbs 19, verse 17. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. That's really kind of quaint, really, isn't it? Whoever is generous to the poor, it lends to the Lord, and the Lord will repay him for his deed. It's like you're doing God a favor to help the poor. Proverbs 28:7. Whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes will get many a curse. Well, that's kind of quite plain. There's a curse there, isn't there? Whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes. Phil Collins, Another Day in Paradise song. She calls out to the man on the street, Sir, will you help me? I'm cold and I've nowhere to sleep. Is there some way you can help me? He walks on, doesn't look back. He pretends he can't hear her, starts to whistle as he crosses the street, seems embarrassed to be there. That's the first two verses of Another Day in Paradise. It kind of echoes this, doesn't it? Psalm 9, verse 18. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever. So God always brings to mind those who lack, and the hope of the poor shall not perish. It's something that will continue on, and justice will prevail. Proverbs 31:19. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Well, what are the rights of the poor and needy? It's almost as if it's a question that shouldn't need to be asked. Proverbs 22, verse 2. The rich and the poor meets together. The Lord is the maker of them all. There's an essential equality about the poor and the rich. But do we find it here? Do we live that equality? No, we don't. Psalm 35, verse 10. All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him. All my bones, my whole being is saying, God, only you can save us. Only you can protect us and bring justice in so that the poor don't get ripped off, they don't get robbed. Psalm 12:5. Because the poor are plundered, it just accepts that as a fact. Because the needy groan, I will now arise, says the Lord. I will place him in the safety for which he longs. A future sense of fulfillment, flourishing for the poor. Psalm 113, verses 5 through 8. Who is like the Lord our God, who is seated on high, who looks far down on the heavens and the earth? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with the princes of his people. There is a natural proclivity again to equality, that the poor are to be seen as no different because they are poor, but are to be seen as essential within society. Proverbs 29:7. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Proverbs 29:7. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. So justice and righteousness is also a wisdom thing, because the wise will understand such knowledge, but the wicked equates with riches and stuff like that, and oppression, won't get it. Proverbs 22:16. Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth, or gives to the rich, will only come to poverty. Again, there's this essential turning upside down, which Jesus always talks about. The last will be first. The poor will be rich. They will get everything. In this case, they will be humble, and they will find justice, and they will inherit. And finally, Proverbs 22:23. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and rob of life those who rob them. We really need to change our mindset as to what it means to be poor. Not just in society, but in terms of a religious outlook. The bishops in the Church of England discovered this in the 70s, when they produced a report called God's Bias to the Poor. Boy, there was political outrage about that. It was about the first and the last time that the bishops did anything decent since then. But that God does have a bias to the poor, to the needy, to the widow, to the orphan, to those with no voice. Now, I'm going to read a version of Psalm 58. It's from the version of the Bible called The Message. And it starts off as a kind of subheading. For the worship leader, a prayer of David to the tune, Do Not Destroy. Can you, panel of judges, get anything right? When you judge people, do you tell the truth and pursue justice? No, your real selves have been revealed. You have wickedness in your heart, and many people have suffered by your hands. Evildoers are naturally offensive, wayward at birth. They were born telling lies and willfully wandering from the truth. Their bite is painful. Their venom is like the deadly poison of a snake. They are like a cobra that closes up its ears to escape the voice of the charmers, no matter how enchanting the spells may be. O God, shatter their teeth in their mouths. Render the young lions harmless. Break out their fangs, O Eternal One. Let them run off like the waters of a flood. And though they aim their arrows, let them fly without their heads. Let them melt like a snail that oozes along. May they be like a stillborn that never catches its first breath, never sees the sun. Before your cook pots, before your cook pots know the furious flame of a fire of thorns, whether green or burning, he will blow the wicked away. Cheer will rise as the right living watch him settle the score, their feet washed in the blood after the onslaught of the wicked. And it will be heard, those who seek justice will be rewarded. Indeed, there is a God who brings justice to the earth. Isn't that a terrifying psalm? But doesn't it speak the truth of where we are? Even within this pandemic, which has been going on, 5-6 months now, where millions have lost their jobs, millions are having to visit food. Oh gosh, my brain's gone. Let me have a cup of coffee. Food supplies, voluntary places. Millions. And the charities involved are having to look further and further afield to be able to supply any kind of need for these things. People can't pay the bills, they can't pay the rent. And those people who are the landlords, who probably quite a few of them bought the houses as a speculative business and so need to pay mortgages, are defaulting as well. And yet, the top, I think it's 25 people, let's just use the word 25, increased their profits by $280 billion within the same pandemic. Are we supposed to just shrug and say, hey, this is perfectly acceptable? It isn't. It's not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. There is absolutely something broken here. And it gets worse when you think about those who are coming out of hospital with huge medical bills. I mentioned last week that some people think that the idea of universal healthcare in the US is some way out left thing. I don't think England's way out left, or Germany, or Japan, or Spain, or France, or Sweden, or Norway. The list goes on. They seem to realize that in society there are things you do for the people. We, in some instances, think it's really weird. But we do extol all the charity work we do. So what's going on here? Bringing it back to this flourishing are the humble / meek, because they will inherit the earth. What happens when you hunger for justice, when you feel in your very bones that this is not right? You want to change things. So you become the protesters, peaceful. The protests that become hijacked now and again by those who have another agenda. But you do it just the same. You oppose oppression because of the color of your skin. You oppose the conditions of schools where teachers have to buy a load of goods, but you do get, a tax-free week to do it in the richest country in the world. I never had to buy anything because the school provided the pencils, the pens, the paper, the books. Yeah, the books may have been a bit ratty, but they didn't have to change every year. And the teachers themselves didn't have to do it. If something's not right, it just burns in you and you want to do something about it. And when you do that and things begin to change, you begin to inherit the world now in a sense of becoming. It's becoming more like the vision of God. It's thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And you are helping to build that kingdom little by little. So the answer to the question, being one of the most meek and humble of people, naturally, I would like to know when I'm likely to inherit the earth. Well, for every step you take towards increasing justice in the earth, by bringing God into it and his justice, that bit you have inherited. And again, it's a now and not now thing. Realized eschatology, as Father Lewis would put it. We realize the kingdom of God now in our own lives. We start with that. so that we are fair and equitable and just in our dealings with people, that we do take the time to realize just how connected this world is, and our purchases can change people's lives. It's that subtle now. There's a part of China that's basically become one huge social experiment and in prison camp. And there's a form of ethnic cleansing going on. I wish I could remember what they were called. The problem? Well, they're Muslim. And so they're being re-educated so that they will follow the party line, the Communist Party line. If they don't, well, they suddenly disappear. We've heard this before. Remember, this is secular. It's not religious. But what happens to them in the meantime? Well, it could be that there are some items of clothing or some things that you've bought that were made in China, that were made by the sweat of these people, oppressed as they are, millions of them. That is your purchasing power at play. We really, 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 really have to think hard about what we do. And this, again, is another problem with the Beatitudes. It's not easy. And yet it's a requirement. It's not a bolted on thing. You may have noticed over the past couple of weeks that even my sermons have changed. They've become a bit more hard-edged. And it's because I'm working with the Beatitudes. I'm listening to what Jesus is saying. And it's changing how I feel and see things, that I just can't say nothing anymore. And if it offends people, Jesus tells us that it will offend people. Do I have all the answers? No. Do I know what God's total justice looks like? No, because I'm a fallen person. I will have my own biases and stuff. But as much as I try and get out of the way of those, and as much as I try and understand the world in which God would want us to live, the more I recognize just how broken certain systems are. So when I have an overall go at Congress, and I don't pick apart particular policies from the left or the right, that's because I believe that Congress is broken, that these people seem to have this ideological purity within themselves, either left or right, that they don't want to talk. Or if they do, it's always on the other person's term. The word compromise is just an absolutely filthy word now. In the meantime, people have their lives destroyed. And here we are, 57 minutes in. So I hope that has answered the question. It's an ongoing thing. We have to live with the consequences of how we live our lives. And and when we look at people like John Lewis and what it cost him, one of the things that still amazes me when I think about it is that within my lifetime, 50 plus 8, it's been where there was segregation in the US, with different bathrooms, different barbers, different water fountains. Really? If you ask the average person who hasn't looked at any of the history of the US, you'd think it was 17th century, 18th century, 19th century tops. But no, 20th century. It's incredible. And we're still working through the effects of that kind of history. It's still a very raw wound. There's still a level of maturity to be achieved. And some people like a certain flag, which, according to most people, is the flag of losers. But to them, it represents something else. It's just a flag to me. If you want to make it represent white supremacism or whatever, I think you've got a real problem, because Jesus was a Jew, for one thing. And a lot of these people who claim this kind of heritage also claim the word Christian, and I don't think you can. So with that, I'm going to finish. I do hope you've gotten something out of this hour, and I do hope that you take care of yourselves, ponder on the Beatitudes and how they're really calling us to a radical change in how we see ourselves and how we see God's creation, and that we are to align ourselves with Him. So until Thursday, when I'll be back with Father Lewis at 3, yes, I will say bid you adieu and God bless. Bye for now.